Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on CTCMPAO standard for fees and billing and what practitioners need to know. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Anne Zhang, and I'm the registrar and CEO of the college. Today's webinar provides an opportunity for you to better understand the recently published standard on fees and billing. We will be answering questions at the end of the presentation. We have enabled our Q&A feature, and if you have any questions throughout the webinar, just type them into the box and we will do our best to answer them. You can also email your questions to the college afterwards. There will also be a recording of this webinar available on the college website for you to access later. We will be providing a certificate of attendance for this webinar, but would like to remind members that you can record your professional development activities in the professional development log, which can be found on the college website for download. I'm happy to be joined today by special guest Rebecca Durgan, College Legal Counsel, and Amy Lee, College Professional Practice Advisor. Welcome, Rebecca and Amy.
Thank you.
College staff Anya Walsh, Sean Kasman, Jennifer Nguyen, and Aaron Ma are also online to support this webinar. Without further ado, we will begin our presentation. Rebecca and Amy, the stage is yours.
Thank you,
Hi,
Anne.
Rebecca. Thank you, Anne. So I thought we would just kind of change the format a little bit. I want to have a conversation with you, Rebecca, just about fees and billing and some common questions that our members might have for us. So why don't I just start off with this question? Why doesn't the college have a fee outline for members?
Great question, Amy. And with that, if you don't mind, let's move to the next slide, and this might provide some visual context for my answer. The short answer, Amy, is that the college trusts the members of the profession to determine what, in fact, is the appropriate rate for their services and products. The college really doesn't and shouldn't, in a best case scenario, become too unduly involved in the business aspect of the members' work. It's only when members engage in conduct that perhaps puts the public at risk that the college will become involved. So with that as a bit of a background, the reason that the college does not set out a stipulated list is, again, that it trusts the members to ascertain and determine based on their individual circumstances, based on their individual costs, as to what would be an appropriate rate. And I should note that some professions do have access to a general list, a fee outline. That's usually generated by an advocacy association for the profession, not the regulator. So as you see on this slide, the college will not dictate what can be charged or what should be charged. The college does recognize that the members of the profession are professionals and are best situated to ascertain the fee structure. And again, the college doesn't want to really unduly interfere with the business aspect of the membership.
Great. So how do the members know what an appropriate fee would be?
So an appropriate fee is basically going to be determined on a variety of factors. I think what they can assume is they're going to want to look at their costs. What are their costs? And to be blunt, a practitioner who has an office and clinic in downtown Toronto is probably going to have different costs than a member who has a practice in a more rural or suburban area. The training, the qualifications of the individual members will also probably drive costs. For example, a brand new member might not feel justified in charging the same rates that a more senior member of the profession has because of the experience that senior member may have. So the key thing is ensuring that what they charge is going to be not considered inappropriate and not considered conducive. And if we go to the next slide, Aaron, the rationale for my somewhat long-winded answer is that members need to remember that when patients come to them, they are usually in pain. They are seeking assistance. So there is an inherent vulnerability between the practitioner and patient dynamic. And we also need to remember that members owe a duty, a fiduciary duty to their patients to not take advantage of them, to recognize that they come to them in a state of vulnerability. So if we could move on to the next slide, this might also help your might help an understanding, Amy, that the colleges derive these sort of principles as to what will assist members in determining whether or not their fee is reasonable. So the first principle is members must charge fees that are reasonable, consistent, and clearly explained. The second principle is that members must use ethical billing practices. And the third principle is that members must maintain a financial record for every patient to whom a fee is charged.
Great. So I was just wondering, does this apply to only services or products as well?
Great question again. If we can move to the next slide, that might help you. And to answer your question, I'm going to unpack that first principle. So to answer your question succinctly, Amy, this principle of whether it just applies to services or it applies to products, it applies to both. The college expects that this principle of charging reasonable, consistent, and clearly explained fees applies to members' services and their products. And as you asked quite appropriately, how do I know whether a fee is appropriate? There is no definition. The college is not going to provide a definition. The only guidance the college will provide to you is that the fee cannot be excessive. Okay, and the threshold, the excessive threshold is met is when it is determined that the member has taken advantage of a vulnerable patient, or that the fee is so high that the profession in and of itself, other TCM practitioners and acupuncturists, would conclude that the member is actually exploiting the patient.
Great. So maybe we can break it down a little bit more here. Let's say I have a senior citizen who's on a fixed income. I know that my rates might be a little bit too high for their affordability because of the fixed income, but they need treatment. So how can I implement a different rate for the senior who I know I can really help, but I know that they can't afford my fee?
So that question still applies to this first principle that we're talking about. So we've just talked about the reasonable aspect of this principle. If we could turn to the next slide, Erin. Your question really dovetails with the principle, the consistency, that fees must be consistent, which again, you'll see that term in this principle. And to answer your question, Amy, again, members are professionals. Members know their patient base best. So the college is not going to necessarily interfere and say, okay, based on a justifiable rationale, you have decided to charge a lesser fee. The college is not going to interfere with that because it sounds, Amy, in your scenario that there was a justifiable reason for doing so. You're not discriminating. So the college isn't going to get concerned with that. What the college will get concerned at is that if members are charging different fees for unfair reasons. So I know it's hard to believe, but if you charge a different fee for someone who's, let's say, of a different race or a different gender or a different nationality or different profession, that would be unfair. That would be discriminatory. And that's where the college will get concerned. But in the scenario that you've described, a member has succinctly identified that because the person is in a less than a precarious financial situation, they're going to charge less. The only guidance the college would give in that situation is that it is documented. So again, back to that justification, the member's going to want to document in their chart why they've charged a lesser fee, because that'll provide some justification and adhere to that consistency.
Great, thank you. How do you think would be the best way to explain my fee schedule to my patients?
So if we could turn to the next slide, Erin, again, we're still within this first principle of charging fees that are reasonable, consistent, and clearly explained. And so to answer your question, Amy, members are, to be blunt, required to clearly explain their fees. The college requires that all members have a written fee schedule in their clinic. It must be in English, but it can also be in any other language that you decide, but there must be at least one fee schedule in English. In addition to having it in the clinic, you may also want to post it on your website. You might want to post it in a pamphlet so people can take it with them. But it has to be easily accessible by patients. And again, the fee schedule should advise the fees for the services, for the products, for any late payments, for any administrative fees. And the rationale is that patients need to know upfront before any fee is charged to them as to what the fee is. And members are going to want to ensure that they have the consent, that that the patient agrees to the fee before it is charged. So if members take that steps, it'll ensure that they're treating their patients with the requisite respect, but it'll also avoid complaints from patients that they were charged a fee that they were unaware about.
And I guess that's why it's so important to make sure that if you are going to provide a prorated fee for, let's say, that example that I gave you for the senior citizen, that it is documented properly, it's documented in their notes. And I think it's really important to make sure that when you're giving your receipt out, that receipt has the reasoning for your discounted fee.
I couldn't agree more, Amy. I think when you provide that transparency and that clarity, you're not only providing it to the patient, you're also doing for your own records. And as we talk about, if any third parties come in to review your records, it's going to be easily understandable as to why you charge that lesser fee.
Particularly insurance companies, because I think that a lot of our members or a lot of our members' patients, they submit to insurance. So it's also that third party that needs to know exactly what our members are charging for.
Exactly. I completely agree. And as we're going to talk about, insurance companies are becoming much more interested in the profession, which is a good thing, but also interested in the records that are being maintained to ensure that policies are being used properly. If we could go to the next slide, Amy, again, just to sort of continuing in this discussion that we've been talking about packages. So quite often we're seeing some members who wish to, in the interest of providing perhaps some financial incentive to their patients, offering packages of services. And the college's position is that this cannot occur, that a package of services cannot occur. And again, as you said, discounts can be provided, but they have to meet the standards of the college. They can't be discriminatory, and they must be clearly advertised and documented.
That brings me to another question that sort of happens often. Let's say that some of my patients, they want to pay up front. They want to pay for their daughter to come in or their mother to come in. Is that okay?
So I can completely understand the desire and the rationale to assist and to comply with the requests or the desires of the patient. But the college would say that that would not be appropriate, that it would not be appropriate to accept money in advance for services that had not been provided. And the rationale is that because regulated health professionals do not take advantage of patients and they only treat what is necessary to be treated, they don't provide unnecessary treatment, that accepting money in advance could result in a situation where patients overpay. Their patients pay for services that they may not in fact actually need. And there could be situations where, again, some members may take advantage of that. So the short answer is that even though some patients may request that and say, no, I'm fine with doing it, members should say, unfortunately, my college does not permit me to do that.
And I think it's important to train our patients as well, to be upfront about where our college is. And yeah, we do have a regulatory body, and we do need to protect our profession and have these guidelines in place.
Completely agree. And it is a bit of a shift because clearly practitioners are making a living. This is their business, and that's quite appropriate. But in addition, this is not a pure business. This is a business by a regulated health professional. And so there is a heightened level of privilege given to that, but it also means additional responsibilities and not acting just as a business, but as a regulated health professional.
Good, great. I had one question about free consultations. Yep. So why is it important for the patient to understand that there is no obligation to treatment with a free consultation?
If we could go to the next slide, Erin, I think we are going to talk, there we go, we're going to talk about this exact issue. So the free consultation, again, is a great service for members to advertise their services and allow patients to know who they are and the wide array of services they can provide. But it's important for, again, back to that fiduciary responsibility, that members ensure that patients are aware that if they decide to offer a free consultation, there is no obligation for them to return. If the member decides that they are going to offer this service, there can be no pressure, there can be no obligation on that patient to return or pay a fee at a later point in time. Because again, if a member decides to offer free first consultation, they are assumingly providing that in an honest fashion. And of course, any communication by a regulated health professional needs to be honest. Also important just on the issue of free consultations, that if that is offered by a member, and again, that's their decision, they need to ensure that it is in fact a genuine consultation. It's not a half consultation and then the member tells the patient, come back, pay a full fee and I'll give you the information at a later date. That's not an honest, and there can be no hidden charges. And the one other thing I do want to mention on free consultations is that the members have decided to offer this. They need to ensure that they comply with all the record keeping. So if they have brought in a patient as a free consultation, and even if that patient never returns, all the record keeping requirements that are required for a paying patient need to also occur. So that's one important thing members do need to remember about free consultations.
Great point. So our next slide, why would a third party need to view my financial records?
Okay, so now we're moving on to our second principle that I described at the outset, that members must use ethical business billing practices. So a third party, and by a third party, we could mean the college, we could mean the insurance company, we could mean an other health practitioner. They may need to view your financial records to either confirm that treatment was provided, to perhaps review your record keeping practices to ensure that they are complying with the college requirements. Sometimes patients themselves will come back and just want to verify whether for tax reasons, get additional copies and provide those, an extra copy, if you will. That might occur well after the date that they've originally been issued. So you can see there are a whole host of reasons to ensure that your billing practices are accurate, ethical, and correct. But you can also importantly, and we'll unpack this a bit, from a reputational perspective for the individual member, they will want to ensure that irrespective of who is asking for the information or when they are asking for the information, accurate information will be provided, because that looks looks favorably on the member providing those services. So the college would recommend to members that they be mindful that it's not just the patient, it's not just they themselves, the member, that will look at the financial record. A variety of other parties can look at that. The reputation of not just the member, but the profession in of itself really is predicated on issuing accurate and not misleading records. And the third component the college would like to communicate is that the financial record should be clear. It should be accurate. There should be no element of surprise for either the patient or any third party. So if there's any sort of practice, any procedure that's required, again, the member is going to want to ensure they've had the consent of the patient in advance, that the patient has agreed, and then that is reflected perhaps in the record.
I'm really happy that you touched on the consent, because we do have a form that is to collect and to consent to collect and release information. And I guess this is a very, very good example as to why we need that document because of this third-party exchange.
Exactly.
Great, cool. So some members are worried that their name and registration number might be used inappropriately at a clinic that they used to work at. So how does that apply to the fees and the billing?
Unfortunately, that does occur. It may not be a common occurrence, but the college does see incidents of just that scenario you've described, Amy, of someone who has discovered that their name, that their certificate, their registration number is being utilized by a third party. And if we can move to the next slide, Erin. This is still within actually this principle of ethical billing practices. So the advice the college has is that the moment you as a member discover or suspect that someone else is using your registration number, your name, your signature, you should immediately alert the college. You should immediately obviously follow up with that perhaps previous employer or current employer and alert them to your concerns. You may also want to reach out to certain insurers that you are aware rely upon your information, or perhaps other colleagues. I don't know if a lot of members are aware of this, but if an insurer determines that a member has been using or permitting their certificate of registration number to be used inappropriately, that member can be delisted. And what that means is that the insurer will no longer respect any invoices that are sent in by patients from that member, that the policy will no longer apply to that. And that is publicly posted on the insurance's website. So you can see from a reputational perspective, it is going to be incredibly important that the member takes action quite quickly to ensure that no one is using their registration number. And it also drives home the importance for all members to regularly audit, to regularly ensure that their certificate of registration number is safe, that they do not perhaps pre-sign certificate. If they show up at a clinic and the employer asks them to pre-sign invoices and receipts, that they simply say, I'm sorry, my regulator does not permit me to do that, because that puts my registration number at risk. And remember that there are going to be a lot of times where you can say, I'm sorry, but college does not permit me to do that. It's a great sort of getting out of an uncomfortable situation, because it's really important, again, from your reputation, the reputation of the profession, that information is kept very safe.
And also brings back to the first principle about accuracy, right? You want to make sure you want to make sure that the information is accurate. And another reason why the upfront payments aren't a good idea, because it's not happening in real time. So it's good to put these ideas together. So I'm glad that you mentioned it today.
Thanks, Amy.
So do our members have to have or maintain a financial record whenever a fee is charged?
You got it. Let's move to the next slide, Erin. This is the third principle that we're speaking about. And the short answer is yes. Members must maintain a financial record for every patient to whom a fee is charged. So that essentially means in real time that every time a patient comes to see you, they must be provided with a receipt. They will be paying at that point in time, or perhaps paying at the end of the month, whatever, but that they you provide a receipt every single time, because that is a great record for the patient and for yourself and for those third parties that you did provide that service on that date. It can't be just a general receipt. It can't be one receipt saying I provided treatment on April 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th for acupuncture. That is not permitted. That does not provide the requisite level of accuracy or detail that the college, the patient, and insurers require. Again, it must be issued on the day that the service or the product was provided. It's important that it is not misleading. So it must provide examples of the treatment or products that were sold. And there should be enough specificity that you can understand, even if you review it a year from now, as to what occurred at that, what treatment was provided on that appointment. It has to identify the treating member. The name, the registration number of the treating professional must be indicated. If we go to the next slide, Erin, here's some more information that needs to be included. It has to identify the place, the clinic, as to where the service was provided. It has to provide the name of the patient. Again, describing in sufficient detail the service or product and how the payment was remitted. Was it paid in cash? Was it paid by credit card? And again, we often see this if a patient comes back a year or two later saying, I'd like another receipt. If you're issuing a duplicate, you should put that on there, a duplicate, so that there is no insinuation that you are providing two receipts for one service that's provided. You'll see an X there on that last line there, Amy, and it says it can't provide false or misleading information. And other colleges have prosecuted members for doing just this, for perhaps being a little too vague, being a little too general, and not providing sufficient accuracy or detail on their invoices. Because what happens, unfortunately, is that some people, if they receive a very vague invoice, they may try then and go to their insurer and seek reimbursement under a different head of their policy. So even if, let's say, TCM services were not provided under the policy, they might ask the member to provide a very vague invoice so that they could perhaps seek it under a naturopathic or homeopathic head of the policy. And so again, the member needs to say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. My regulator will not permit me to do that. I need to ensure, I need to indicate it was acupuncture, or it was perhaps some, TCM acupuncture or acupressure or tween massage, that needs to be indicated because that is in fact what occurred.
Right. I guess I can see why the information is so important. Let's say I was providing a house call. Would that need to be documented?
Really good question, right? Because you think the college is saying, okay, you need to indicate the clinic, and you might show up on a house call with your standard clinic invoices. My advice, though, is that you would indicate provided at a home visit or house call. Because again, what you're doing is you're providing that snapshot. You're indicating quite accurately where the service was provided, which may in fact help you should you ever be asked to justify or explain what occurred on this date. By providing that information, you're being accurate, but it may also assist you.
That's really, really great. What if my patient is not comfortable with providing their personal contact information, like their phone, their address? What do I do?
That's a fair question. So we know that the college is saying that this information must be listed, but let's be frank, members cannot force patients to provide this information. So in that situation, if the patient, you'll have to have the patient name, but if the patient says, I don't want to provide my email address, I don't want to provide my address or phone number, that's their choice. So you would indicate, patient refused to provide or patient declined to provide. That's accurate. And so you can indicate that. That would be the best way to address that situation.
Okay, great. That's really good because, in the days of electronic filing and everything, it's good to have as much information on that receipt as possible, even if it's not coming from you as a practitioner, that you have asked the client or the patient to provide that with you, but they just said, I prefer not to. So again, it's another thing, it's another step for them in case the third party comes in and asks for that information. Exactly. Your information is accurate because the patient had decided not to comment on it. So exactly. That's really, really great. Thanks, Rebecca.
No problem, Amy.
I just had another question. It's about Principle 3.
Okay. If we go to the next slide. Thank you, Erin.
What should I do with the financial records after the 10-year retention period?
Okay, so you have, first of all, correctly identified that members must maintain all appointment records, financial records for 10 years. And the 10-year clock is either after the last date that they saw them. So if I last saw my TCM practitioner today, they would have to maintain my record until June 25th, 2031. The caveat to that is if I was a minor, if I was a child, I was not an adult, then that clock would not start to run until I was 18. So if you're treating a child, be mindful that even if you stop treating that child, you're going to need to hold on to that record for a lot longer than 10 years. But once that 10-year limitation or once that 10-year clock comes up, once the alarm bell rings, you are permitted to just have that record destroyed. Again, getting back to record keeping, you will keep a list of all patient records that were destroyed after the 10-year window. So if 20 years from now I come back to my practitioner and said, I'd like my records, my practitioner is going to be able to go and say, oh, I'm sorry, Rebecca, those were destroyed on June 25th, 2031. Pursuant to the permission of my college. Now, it's not required, but some members will reach out to patients at the last known address, perhaps a year in advance of that 10-year window, to alert them that be mindful, I will be destroying this in 10 years. So if you do want a copy or anything, please let me know. That's not required, but that's, you could see that would be a real valued service perhaps to patients if members did do that. But the short answer is that they can be destroyed once that 10-year window has expired.
Okay, great, thank you. So with that, if an insurance company has asked me to provide copies of my patient records, can they do that?
So if we can move to the next slide, Erin, and as you indicated, Amy, Several practitioners have their patients sign a variety of forms when they first show up, one of which might be the consent to disclose. And depending on your consent form, what I usually see is that insurers, when they come in and they say, Amy, can you please provide the patient record for patient X? The insurer will provide you with authorization to disclose that information. So the insurer is going to provide you with the necessary information, the necessary authorization for you to disclose. And to be blunt, usually patients, when they buy insurance, that's a term of the insurance, that the patient consents to the insurer following up with their practitioners, which allows the insurer just to audit and make sure that everything is fine. One thing I would like to remind members is that when the college comes in and asks for information, whether pursuant to the Quality Assurance Committee or whether it's pursuant to an investigator, members do not need to obtain the consent of their patients before releasing that information. The legislation permits the college to do that. So with insurance companies, you'll usually receive an authorization. Whenever the member's in doubt, they should always verify, do I have the necessary legal authority to disclose this information? But a reminder that when the college comes in, whether it's a quality assurance committee asking for records to do a peer and practice assessment, or whether an investigator has come in pursuant to an investigation, the member does not need to worry. The member does not need to follow up with the patient because the legislation permits that to occur.
Right. So it all goes back to, again, the documentation and the accuracy of the documentation.
Exactly. And if there's any doubt, the member can either reach out to the college or reach out to the patient.
Great. Thank you. Where can our members find out more information on these guidelines?
So the college has done a great job of putting together resources. So not just this webinar, not just this discussion that we're having, but your college puts together a variety of resources on its website to help members understand and fully comply with the expectations. And remember, this information is also available to the public. So the public knows what they can expect, whether it's on the situation of invoices or that this information is publicly available to the profession and to the public. So the first resource is the standard. As you and Anne indicated, this is a new standard that has been created by the college to, again, provide clarity to members on the issue of fees and billing. In addition to the standard on fees and billing, you can see that we've spoken a few times that sometimes there's an interface with advertising. So advertising perhaps on the website. So there's an advertising guideline on the website that will, again, fully flesh out some of the questions that members may have. The other resource, and I kind of say resource somewhat reluctantly, is there is a regulation that is made under the Traditional Chinese Medicine Act, and that regulation is called the Professional Misconduct Regulation. And when members review that document, it's not a long document, it sets out the acts of professional misconduct for this profession. And you can see when you review it that there are several acts of professional misconduct that could relate to the issue of fees and billing. So this is a bit of a map for members to know what is considered professional misconduct. So the first one, for example, we have here, failing to reply appropriately to a reasonable request for information respecting a service or product provided or recommended by the member. So if a patient follows up and says, I'd like information on what you provided to me, or if an insurer says, I'd like you to provide the financial statements for patient X, and you don't reply appropriately, perhaps because your financial records aren't in the form that you would like, that's an act of professional misconduct. So it's really important to keep your records up to date. Submitting an account or charge for services that the member knows is false or misleading. So getting back to that accuracy, if you're really ensuring that your invoices, that your accounts are clear and accurate, you're going to avoid this possible act of professional misconduct. The third issue we have here, charging a fee that would be regarded by members as excessive. So that is in an independent act of professional misconduct. And remember, this falls within that principle 1. So you want to ensure that your fees don't have to be exactly the same as your colleague down the street, but you want to ensure that they're not excessive, that they are reasonable in light of your experience, education, location. You're going to want to keep that in mind. And if we can go to the next slide, Erin, the list continues. So you can see it's an independent act of professional misconduct if you do not advise a patient prior to providing this service of the fee that's going to be charged, or if you're going to charge any penalties for late fees. back to that clarity and ensuring that you proactively alert patients of any fee before you do so. Another act of professional misconduct, if you don't itemize the account for products or services. So you can't, again, just say TCM services, $300. If that included an acupuncture treatment, if that included some herbs, if that included other components, you need to list those out. Otherwise, you've engaged in an act of professional misconduct. 6, offering or giving a reduction for prompt payment of an account. You asked Amy earlier if it's okay to provide or charge a lesser fee for someone who's in a financial precarious situation. That's fine, but the regulation stipulates that if you tell someone who you may know is a, let's say a wealthy patient, I will reduce your fee if you pay me instantaneously. That is considered an act of professional misconduct because you are somewhat being discriminatory.
Right.
You're giving people who have ready access to funds a reduction in the fee. So that would be considered a discriminatory one.
Yeah, it's not fair. It's not fair for other patients, right? Who may not be in the same financial situation.
Exactly. The penultimate one there, we have breaching without reasonable cause an agreement relating to professional services or fees. So if you, pursuant to your written list, your fees list, decide to arbitrarily change that, perhaps you increase your fees every year due to inflation, but you don't alert the patient in advance, and the patient takes issue with that. Theoretically, if you don't alert your patients in advance of changes in fees, you could be engaging in an act of professional misconduct. And the final one we just wanted to flag for you is failing to keep records in accordance with the standards of the profession. So the college is giving you tools as to how they believe you can comply with this standard, with these expectations, and you can see the importance of keeping accurate financial records. And there are other webinars talking about, you know, the other components, the other records that are involved with a TCM practice, but really, really important. It might be at the end of the treatment, you might be in a rush, but do not rush in completing that invoice and completing that fee, because you want to ensure that you don't breach that act of professional misconduct.
Well, I'm really glad that we're talking about the professional misconduct regulation. So what happens when a member contravenes a regulation? What happens if we break the rules?
So practically, if a member breaches the rules, what can happen is usually one of two things. One, a patient will file a complaint with the college. And if a patient files a complaint with the college, the complaint must be investigated. So the Inquiries, Complaints, and Reports Committee will conduct an investigation that may result in an investigator showing up at your clinic asking for the record. It may result in the college just asking you to respond to the complaint and send in the record. It'll depend on the situation, but that's one area where you may have to interface. And again, you're going to have to produce your patient chart. You're going to have to produce all your financial records. The other way that this can manifest is even if a complaint is not filed, what can occur and what usually occurs is that an insurance company, if they call in and ask for information, and if they are concerned that the receipt does not comply with the college expectations, the insurance company might call up the registrar and say, I'm not going to file a complaint, but this is my concern. And in that situation, the registrar will perhaps commence an investigation. So it's not a complaint, but it might be a registrar's investigation, which will again result in the member handing over their full file. So there's very little way to sort of escape this. You know, the best medicine here is to be proactive and avoid any concerns, avoid any complaints. And even if a complaint comes in, and there may be complaints, but if the member is able to demonstrate that, fine, the patient's complained, but here are my records, here are my invoices, there is clarity here, there is accuracy. If that happens, the member can expect that the matter is going to be resolved very quickly because the college is going to be comforted that they have followed the rules.
Okay, great. Thank you. That was amazing. I really enjoyed the in-depth view as to how this all works and how the outline for our profession works out in a legal standard. So that's very great news.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you.
So we have several
has been a really great conversation, Amy and Rebecca.
Oh, okay.
I know we have received some frequently asked questions. Perhaps we will start with some questions we have received.
Sure. Amy, do you want to take a run at this one?
So the question is, my posted rate is $120 per visit. However, if the patient is paying for the service personally and does not have an extended health insurance coverage, I will provide a credit reducing the rate to $100 per visit. Is this acceptable? So as we discussed, this scenario would be contrary to the professional misconduct regulation. Am I right?
You got it.
So the posted fees are not honest and they're not accurate. So the practitioner, in effect, is billing patients with insurance that is more than their actual rate. So it would be acceptable for practitioners to lower the fees in individual cases of financial hardship, like we discussed before. The level of reduction would be in accordance to your professional discretion, because the college doesn't make up the fees for us.
Exactly.
So it's recommended that you have this pricing agreement in writing, and that it helps to maintain an accurate and verifiable documentation.
Perfect.
Good.
You were a lawyer to past life, Amy.
I just want to make sure it's clear, because sometimes, you know, when we read these guidelines and when we're looking at the standards of practice, a lot of it is sort of words, right? So it's nice for our members to sort of put these questions into scenarios so we can better understand the standard of practice, as well as the rules pertaining to what needs to be documented, why it's important, and how it's so transparent for not only our members but also our patients. So this is great help.
I agree, Amy. Explaining the rationale behind these rules. These are not just arbitrary rules imposed by the regulator. There's a rationale behind this, and being able to discuss the rationale will hopefully allow members to understand why it's so important. And again, the college, in doing things like this, the webinars, providing the guidelines, we know that the college's mandate is to serve and protect the public interest, but by ensuring that the members are fully aware of the expectations, of the rules, of the standards, the college is protecting the public because they're ensuring that their members are fully up to date. So you can see why services such as this that your college does quite regularly really, really helps members and the public.
That's great. Good.
Should we go to the next question?
Sure, yeah.
Is that, yeah?
Yeah. My patient has been unable to use their insurance coverage. Let's say it's $500 for acupuncture due to COVID. If I promise to provide the service at a later date, can I issue an invoice today for $500 in acupuncture treatment?
So the short answer is no. And again, I can understand why a lot of members would want to help their patients because they haven't been able to use their insured services. But back to that statement, when patients ask this, members should say, unfortunately, my regulator does not permit me to do this. And the rationale, of course, is that if you did issue an invoice for $500 on June 25th, 2021, that wouldn't be accurate, because $500 worth of acupuncture services were not provided on June 21. So you would essentially be accepting money in advance for services to be provided later, which would not be appropriate. And again, back to that accuracy, you can also understand the concern of insurers. And I'm not saying that the college is here to help insurers, not at all, but there's a recognition on the part of the college that a lot of members do rely on insurance policies, that's an important part of their practice. So it's also important to the college that the insurance industry has utter trust and confidence in bills, in invoices that are issued by members of this profession. So that is why if an insurance company became aware of this, they would be understandably concerned, because they might believe that some fraud is engaging. And even if the member is intending fully to provide those services, that is not an accurate invoice. So in this situation, when the patient approaches, the best approach is to simply say, I'm sorry, my regulator does not permit me to do that.
Great, thank you. So the next question, My colleague is not a member of the college, but is very effective at recommending TCM herbs. Can I issue an invoice in my name for TCM services, even though my colleague met with the patient?
Short answer, no. Because again, that wouldn't be an accurate invoice. If your colleague met with the patient, the colleague could issue an invoice saying that they recommended TCM herbs, but you yourself did not do that. So it would not be appropriate for you to issue an invoice. Even though perhaps your colleague is very, very wise, has a lot of expertise in this area, that would not justify this. And again, you need to remember the rationale. If that patient submits the invoice to their insurer from, I don't mean to pick on Amy here, but let's say Amy issues that invoice, the insurance company is going, okay, great. This patient has $500 worth of TCM services under their policy. Amy is a registered member of the College of Traditional Chinese Medicine Practitioners and Acupuncturists of Ontario. We will fulfill this invoice, whereas your colleague is not. So the insurer might say, no, we don't insure services that are not provided by members of this college. So that would be a way of the patient, unfortunately, trying to access services that she hasn't paid for through her policy. And your own reputation does not want to get sullied on that. So in that situation, again, if you have a colleague who is not a registered member, who is providing services, they can provide an invoice, but you will not attach your name because you did not provide that service.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you. Next question. I underwent several years of additional training and provide individualized treatment plans to my patients. My clinic is downtown Toronto. My hourly rate is double the rate of my colleague in Simcoe, who does not have my training. Will my rate be considered excessive?
So based on that scenario, I would say no. It sounds like, there are some significant and justifiable distinctions in your rate. And we don't know what the rate is, but we know that real estate in downtown Toronto would be much more expensive than that in Simcoe, Ontario, which is a wonderful town, don't get me wrong, but I know real estate rates in Toronto are absolute madness. There also seems to be a distinction here in training, that the person who's asking this question has much more training, much more experience, much more perhaps knowledge than their colleague that lives in Simcoe. So there are justifiable reasons as to why that rate would be double. So in that scenario, based on that information, I wouldn't consider that excessive. So I say the short answer is no. If you can articulate as to why, and it sounds like, again, this rate would be sort of across the board. You're not charging, let's say, an excessive rate or a higher rate for patients who come to you seeking relief from, chemotherapy treatment. That would be a flag. You're a very vulnerable patient who's coming to you for just relief, acupuncture relief as a result of them undergoing chemotherapy. If you're trying to provide, charge a far excessive fee for that, that's going to be a bit concerning. But based on this scenario, it's very justifiable. It's objective rationale. That scenario would not result in a concern of professional misconduct.
Great. Thank you.
Can I ask you Can I ask you a question this time?
Yeah, for sure.
Let's do this. I think question number 5. We go to Aaron. How about this? Is it too much work to individually list the services and numerous herbs that my patient purchased? Why can't I just state TCM services and products and the quantum?
So, this kind of goes back to your accuracy, right? The accuracy must reflect the service provided for the product. So this includes a listing of any herbal products, any of the quantity or any type of service that's provided. And the patient, I think, really needs to understand the charges. I think it goes down to what the patient is paying for. It's important that the patient has any, for the third party, like the insurance companies, to understand the charges as well. So with this, practitioners may wish to include a copy of the prescription because it's relevant information and it's accurate information, along with the receipt to provide further details. So this kind of drills in that accuracy as to what was provided and what you're paying for. And I think this is very, very important for our members to understand because, you know, their, like you said, reputation is on the line. Everything needs to be listed out. And if anybody has any questions, it has been accurately documented and it's right there plain as much as everybody needs to see.
That's great, Amy, and I really like when you mentioned about the prescription. And again, it really drives home the importance of this isn't just going to the store and buying something, right? This is as a regulated health professional, whether it's treatments, whether it's herbs or products, that there is a health consequence to those products, to those treatments. So it is going to be very important that it is clearly articulated what was provided or what was received by that patient because of the health consequences.
And the accountability, right? Because we are regulated by the college.
Right.
The college is here to protect the public. So it's super, super important that we have that. We're accountable for, as members, what we're giving out to the public. So I feel like more documentation is important at the end of the day.
It really does benefit everyone, right? It benefits the member, the patient, the reputation of the profession, and again, for an insurer or third party that comes in, it's going to make their lives that much easier as well.
And they may not even know, like they may not even, this could be the first acupuncture treatment that they've ever seen that they're adjusting right now, right? So the more information that they have, the easier the communication it is with the insurance company to within our college as well.
That's great. Can I ask you another question?
Sure.
Okay, Aaron, if we go to the next slide. This is a great question. I'm a dual registrant. I am registered with the college and the College of Massage Therapists of Ontario. Can I issue one receipt for massage therapy and TCM treatment?
So this goes back to accuracy, right? So would that be accurate? I don't think that would be very accurate because you are providing a TCM service and or providing a massage therapy service, right? So practitioners do practice in more than one regulated health profession. I think it's super important to maintain separate patient and financial records. It has to be clear to your patients and third parties, so that insurance company, what profession, what professional that they are seeing in the moment at any given time. So also, at what capacity? Who are you representing? Are you representing an acupuncturist, or are you representing as a TCM practitioner, or are you representing as a massage therapist? So every file should be completely independent, including the record keeping, including the financial records as well. So the more information, the more accuracy, separate files, I think would be beneficial to everybody.
Perfect.
Amy and Rebecca, I noticed that attendees have also asked some questions. And one of the questions they asked just now is actually the next question we have. If you don't mind, go to the next slide. They ask if they can offer gift certificates or prepaid services. For example, one of their patients would like to purchase a gift certificate for their family members. Amy and Rebecca, I will defer that to you.
Amy, do you want to take that, or would you like me to take that?
Well, I think this goes back to paying for a service that you have not received, right? So that goes back to the accuracy again. If a receipt is being provided, it should reflect the treatment. I think invoicing a patient prior to a treatment would be considered falsifying records and submitting charges for treatments that they haven't yet provided. So it doesn't matter how you put it. If you're prepaying for a family member, if you're providing a gift certificate as a gift for a member, you're prepaying. So these things can kind of get a little bit sticky and muffled.
I agree, and it can really. It's. I do know some health professionals do permit the issuance of gift certificates. That being said, I think from what I understand, the practice of traditional Chinese medicine, because it is so quite specific and it's very difficult to say, 8 acupuncture treatments will address this, or a certain amount of herbs will address this. The profession, the practice is so specifically individualized to the patient's needs. And so that is why this college has had a lot of difficulty saying that someone can come in and simply buy a gift certificate for TCM services. There's a reflection that, again, this is a health profession. It is not just a business.
Right.
So what you're saying makes a lot of sense, Amy.
Thank you. The next question is actually a common question during the pandemic. Members would like to provide telepractice services, how to bill for virtual care.
Did you want to take this one, Rebecca?
Sure, I will. So I would kind of analogize this to providing a house call, like Amy mentioned earlier. So if you are providing telepractice services, and I'm not going to get into the do's and don'ts of telepractice, there are some individual issues that you'll want to ensure you're complying with. But just focusing on the billing component, if you are providing telepractice services, if you are not seeing the patient in person, if it's over a Zoom call, I would indicate that on the invoice, simply saying this was via Zoom, because it accurately identifies the interaction. It really, again, will get that there's no sense of anything false or misleading, and don't underestimate the importance for you as a member to be able to perhaps recall a year, 2, 3 years from now that service. You are very busy practitioners. You deal with a lot of patients every day. So it's going to be difficult to remember certain interactions. But so providing this clarity information, and I know it feels like the Zoom years or months have been going on forever, but soon we'll be returning to hopefully fully in-person sessions, or maybe not. Maybe you will continue on the Zoom component with your practice. But it gets back to accuracy. It gets back to simply saying you're going to be providing and complying with all the components, but simply indicating, instead of at the clinic, because your invoice will have the clinic name at the top, so there'll be a default belief that services were provided at the clinic. Well, if it wasn't provided at the clinic, you just need to indicate via Zoom, via WebEx. That'll just provide that clarity instantaneously, so it won't be a lot of extra work. Just think about clarity and accuracy.
And also expressing to your patient that they can double check to make sure that telepractice or house calls are like that indication is covered within that's covered within their package insurance policy, right? So
it would be horrible if it didn't, right? In today's day and age, it would be horrible if it didn't. But good point.
It's a good thing to talk to your patients about it, right? Like, I'm trying to provide you with as much information as I can. This is what I have to list on my receipt because of the responsibility that I have with my college. But you might want to check and confirm with your insurance policy whether or not telepractice is covered. So
great point.
I think that opens up the line of communication as to, the professionalism of our college.
Great. I think we still have time for one more question. I see a few members also asked that question online. If they work at a clinic with multiple other professions, and if they're independent contractor with a health group, where the office manager handles all the billing, is that okay? Are they still responsible for the billing records?
Want me to start, Amy?
Sure, yeah.
So the short answer is that's okay. That's okay if you yourself are not individually doing the billing. But if you are asking someone else to do this, you need, and it's your professional responsibility to ensure that the office manager is setting out the bills so that they comply with college requirements. And if there are lots of different professionals within that clinic, it may not, but it may mean that acupuncture invoices or invoices that were issued under your name may look different than your colleague who is a massage therapist or a naturopath. So A, you need to ensure that the office manager is doing so properly, and B, remember that audit requirement. You simply can't come in and saying, okay, John, here's my standard, good luck. I hope you do everything correctly. There is an independent professional expectation on you to follow up, to periodically ensure that those invoices that are being issued by the office manager do comply with your college. And if they don't, it is your responsibility to change that. And again, I know this can be awkward if you're an employee, but it's really important for you to communicate to the office manager, to your employer, to say, I'm not making these requirements up. I'm not trying to be difficult. These are the requirements that my regulator imposes. So to try to find a way, perhaps, that this, you can be part of the solution. But it's okay if you don't individually issue the invoice, but make no mistake, you will be responsible for everything that's included on that invoice.
Right. It's the accountability of the member, right? Because that information needs to be accurate. You worked hard to have this this license to be able to practice traditional Chinese medicine as well as acupuncture. So that, even though you have an office manager that takes care of the paperwork for you, but that's still your name on that receipt. That's still your number on that receipt, and you have that responsibility.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Rebecca and Amy, for sharing your knowledge and speaking with us today. This is really helpful. Due to the limited amount of time, I don't think we can answer other questions, but any questions that were not answered will be addressed later. I just want to remind our members that the webinar will count toward your professional development hour. And as mentioned earlier, the recorded webinar will be available on the college website at a later date. Well, thanks again, Amy and Rebecca. I hope they all enjoyed today's session. And thank you again to those who were able to join us today. And I wish you and all of you and your loved ones a safe, healthy, and happy summer. And we look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.